how about this for our first ever Stars in Cars guest? He's an absolute star, the 1970 Brownlow Medalist, State Cricketer, probably would have played for Australia if not given the ultimatum. Rohan, we're driving around Port Melbourne with their favourite son, Peter Bedford.
It's a good get, Finey. Good way to start. And Port, just driving through Bay Street now, the heart of Port Melbourne, it's sort of not the Port Melbourne we grew up with, is it, Peter?
Certainly isn't, Rohan. Good to be with you and Mark, going through the streets of Port, reminiscing on times gone by. Actually, just as we are now in Bridge Street here, when I first came out of hospital, our home was in Heath Street, which is just at the back of Bay Street here. And I remember many occasion with about 8 or 10 other boys playing cricket on a pole just off Bridge Street here, hour after hour.
There's a few... Sorry, Pete.
I'd say you dare not get out because you might get a hit for 2 days, Mark. You know?
That's if you were batting. There'd be a few accidental millionaires in Port Melbourne, people of maybe your parents' vintage and just owning modest houses that back in the day might have been considered cottages, and nowadays nothing here goes for less than $1 million.
Oh, well, exactly. And I remember a couple of mates of mine, as an early teenager, they would go to other suburbs and to parties, etc., and they'd come back and through the week we'd chat and
turn left here to get
please turn left into Ingalls, heading towards the port ground.
No, I won't kill you, mate.
But yeah, and they, through the course of the evening, conversation would come up, where do you come from, where do you live? And you know, of course I said Port Melbourne. They said, Port Melbourne, how could you live in Port Melbourne? You know, because it was considered not such a great place to live in those days, but obviously as youngsters we loved it because we were, you know, so immersed in sport, and 60 or 70% of the population followed the footy club, and the cricket club was a very, you know, viable entity in those days, playing in the sub-district competition. And from a personal viewpoint, I feel very fortunate because I had Laurie Mithen, the great Melbourne centreman, as my first coach at Port, and then Brian Buckley for the next 2 seasons before I headed to South Melbourne. And of course a fellow called Fred Layla, who was a great Carlton cricketer, as my coach when I played cricket here before crossing to Melbourne.
Now we're just coming up to the Northport Oval here. I'm old enough to have seen a bit of, you know, vintage VFA here in the 70s. The thing that I always remember about it, Peter, is the smell from the soap factory. It was a fairly distinctive aroma. Exactly,
Rohan. Just across the road in Ingalls Street we had the kitchens factory, and as you say, on training nights and even on the match days you get that aroma wafting across from kitchens, permeating through the oval. It took a little bit of time to get used to, but once you did, you know, you felt quite at home with it.
You know, the other thing I remember, because
Hey, just a sec, do you reckon I could be a bit cheeky and actually drive into the ground here?
That's the back, that's Bunnings there.
Yeah, that's the back of the ground.
Yeah.
We might try another way, but I'll tell you what, you wouldn't want to be a trespasser at Northport Oval. Not if some of the old custodians were still there.
No, I was going to say, is the gate open? Barry Kidd might be inside just there. I don't know.
You'd see a few fights on the terraces, but then you could go in at half time and have the best scones and tea I reckon I've ever had at a footy game.
Well, they
were legendary, weren't they?
The ladies' committee here, which was headed by Lil Goss, legendary Norm Goss's wife, and her band of helpers. You know, as you say, people, I think, you know, it was almost mandatory you'd go in there at half time and have your scones and a cup of tea, Ro, and you know, just as that little interlude between the breaks in the match at half time. But you're right, it was Port was a very parochial area, and the people, as you see, a lot of vision from older days where you see some of the ladies with umbrellas, waving umbrellas. And,
they weren't waving; they were belting the opposition players with them.
Oh, well, sort of just gesticulating towards them that something might happen if certain things didn't happen. mark.
Yeah, decisions not paid or old debts not settled.
Exactly.
You might be able to catch the ground in the back, but we're going to go from the Port Melbourne ground and do what you did, Peter, and head to South Melbourne.
Right.
Now tell us about that, because that was really controversial for younger viewers. You couldn't cross to the VFL without a clearance, and you were banned for 10 years or something from playing the VFA?
Correct, Rohan. I had 3 years at Port and fortunate enough to play in 3 grand finals, and unfortunately only be able to be involved in 1 win. But I was 21 in the April of '68, and I was playing Sheffield Shield cricket. I'd played for a couple of seasons and got married in early January of '68, and the opportunity came to go to South, and a sum was offered if I transferred across, which would have enabled us to put a deposit on the house. And playing Shield cricket and getting $7 a day, $28 for 4 days, when we used to aggregate about 28,000 to a Shield match, made the offer very palatable. And but Port wouldn't clear me, and I decided to go the second round of 1968. South beat St Kilda. I'm sorry about that, Mark, but South beat St Kilda the first round at the Lake Oval.
Don't worry, we get you back in 1970.
You
We'll
do,
talk about that later.
exactly, in no mean order. But the second game was against Hawthorn at Glenferrie Oval, and a lot of the older people would know the Glenferrie Oval very well, and it was a bit of a baptism of fire out there. And I remember standing in front of the grandstand watching the seconds, and Tommy Layeff, who was a staunch Port Melbourne supporter and player in the old days, and very good mates with Norm Goss, came up to me and said, Gossy wants to see you. And that preceding week, leading into the Hawthorn game, he and Norm Goss and Darky McFarlane had come down to our home, and every night virtually trying to stop me from going across the Port to South rather, and in the end, I as I say, I did determine myself that I wanted to go and see if I could play anyhow. And he said, Tommy said that Normie and Darky McFarlane and my wife Brenda were out the back. So I gingerly walked down. I thought, they're having another go to try and sort of keep me there. And he said, listen, forget what's transpired through the week. We knew you were going to go at some stage, and just go out and do your best. And that was it. But I'd wondered through the course of the game whether I'd made the right decision, even coming from a background, as you alluded to earlier, Rohan, with Port Melbourne, because Port was a very vigorous team and played in the competition where you had to earn your stripes in the old VFA. And but just before half time, Skilts was knocked out by a fella called Jenkin, I think, and he was just completely out to it. And I think in those days they were able to use smelling salts, I think, which are banned now. But he was revived. He was revived, and at half time, he a little bit more work was done, and he came out and he ended up kicking 5 goals for the game. Of course, in those days, once you were off, you couldn't be replaced, of course. So it would have been a massive loss from our point of view.
So smelling salts were banned, were they?
I think they're banned now.
We could have had a 1960s version of the supplement saga.
Is that the old Epsom salts?
Yeah, they were not Epsom salts, but it was just...
Epsom salts were to reinvigorate you after the game.
Yeah, but just it had a sort of scenty smell about it, and an aroma which sort of just wafted through your nostrils and just sparked you a little bit.
Further damaged your brain, probably. Speaking of Bob Skilton, I mean, in the modern game, him getting knocked out, remembering that Eric Guy had dealt him a fearful blow earlier on in his career, you wonder whether or not today Bob Skilton would have been allowed to play out his career or advised against it.
Well, there's a good famous picture of him accepting one of the Brownlows with absolute shiners, isn't it?
And that was the result of friendly fire, Rohan
Oh, was it?
Mark. Yeah, we played Collingwood at Collingwood. Was that the second or third last game of the season? And Mopsy Rantel came from the side, and Skilts, as he always did, putting his body on the line, came from Mark, and Mopsy collected him, and that was the result of the two shiners. And I remember as I did in '70, the winner of the Brownlow used to go into Festival Hall, the old stadium, to be presented to the boxing crowd. And and I remember Skilts being there, presented by Ron Casey.
That's right, yeah.
In the ring, and he certainly didn't look out of place at Festival Hall. And
Now, I've just got to jump in because we're approaching the Albert Park complex. And whereabouts did you go to school? Because what is now the Aquatic Centre, I think used to be South Melbourne Tech.
South Tech is here on the corner, Mark,
Right.
and I think the Players Association had offices, or got offices,
Yeah.
I think just in that complex now. But I went to school in Port Melbourne. I was taught by the nuns I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship, and I ended up at Parade College, or CBC Parade as was, in East Melbourne. And where I did proficiency, actually, the Form 3 in those days, when it was raised, it became the Dallas Brooks Hall. You'd do Form 3 there, then you'd go across the road to the Bluestone Pile and do intermediate leaving matric. And just for those who are a little bit trivia minded, the Presbyterian Ladies College, where we did Form 3, was a site where the Dallas Brooks Hall was built, and the Dallas Brooks Hall was where the 1970 Brownlow medal was counted. So
They had some weird venues for the Brownlow before it moved to the Southern Cross, didn't they? I think Len Thompson won his at the Leander, down on the banks of the Yarra there.
And I think Stewie, the Chevron, I think,
the
right?
Chevron.
Yeah. So passing the South Ground now, the old South Ground. Geez,
That's a good idea. You could have had the Brownlow ceremony and then watched a gig by Lobby Lloyd and the Coloured Balls or something like that.
Exactly.
Yours was the first televised Brownlow, wasn't it?
It was, Mark, and it's quite interesting because since that time I've encountered a number of ladies who tell me what a great night they had, Brownlow night, and I look them in the eye and I don't want to rain on their parade because there wasn't a solitary female there that particular night. And
But there were captains manning.
there were captains manning the boards.
Oh, yeah,
Now that's
that was a
hilarious,
great
isn't it?
Yeah, the board was like a semicircle, and all the captains, as you said, Mark, manned the boards, and I remember sitting beside Wayne Walsh, and Walsh is a supremely confident person, and we'd had a pretty good year. I think we'd won about 7 awards. I think won the Palaco Inquest, which is a car, Mike Williamson's, and
So you want to go?
the Dustings. Yeah, won 2. Won
What?
the World of Sport. I won that one as well on the Sunday.
Now, did you share
Won the
that with the
Herald.
players, or you just kept it?
No, I think one of them went to paying a bit of tax, I think.
One went to pay the other?
Yeah, pretty much, and won the Button Medal, which was the Sporting Globe, and the Herald. So there were 4 of them, and I won a cruise as well. So it was pretty good, but you still don't know how the umpires are going to vote. And but as the counting went, we weren't doing all that well early, and I said to Walshy, I said, I don't think we're going to do too well here, mate. He said, don't worry. He said, you'll get all the 3s, and but it would have been nice to have sort of been up there a bit early. But as it worked out, we were able to, in racing parlance, work our way through the field, and end up winning by 4 votes.
Because that was the other thing too. They didn't read them out in sequential order, did they? They used to read all the 1 votes and then all the 2 votes and then all the 3
Then
votes.
the 3s, exactly right.
Yeah.
And the last 10 were virtually shuffled, and mine was the last name read out. It was the Bedford South Melbourne, and we were able to beat Gary Dempsey by 4 votes with Jezza and Barry Coble, 3rd and 4th.
Not a bad field, eh?
Yeah. Well, Dempsey got his turn 5 years
He
later.
did.
Didn't
He did 75.
What a remarkable year for you, 1970 was. Obviously the Brownlow, but South Melbourne making the finals for the first time in, what was it, 25 years?
Oh, exactly. Since the bloodbath at
45.
at Princes Park.
And
right?
then we haven't even got on really to your cricket exploits, but you basically helped Victoria win the Sheffield Shield that year, did you not?
Well, it was a good calendar year, Rohan, because I was lucky enough to get 5 for 40 at the Adelaide Oval in the second innings against South Australia, and also from my perspective, because I love my cricket, to get Greg Chappell out for the second time in my career, and to get 5 for 40 in the early February of 1970, and then for the Swans to make the final in that same year was it was pretty good stuff. Yeah.
And for the viewers that don't know, what sort of bowler were you, Peter?
I was a leg spinner, Mark. Yeah, and
did you have a variety of different deliveries that you named?
oh,
Did you have the Skilton? Did you have the
no, pretty much just the standard balls, the leg break, and I
Rohan?
bowled a wrong, yeah. So
Obviously not too easy to pick if you were getting Greg Chappell out. Look,
yeah, no, it's sort of I was quite chuffed at that, Mark, because I think Greg, I've seen in a lot of reports and that where they rank the top batsman who played for Australia, and he always rates in the top 10, I think. So
I don't think it means all that much, but the best I've seen.
Yeah.
So how close were you to Test selection? Because I mean, of all the guys that have mixed, elite football and cricket careers, you're right up there, I reckon.
Hey, can I answer on Peter's behalf? A bloke called Watkins played for Australia around there.
Yeah.
A leggy from New South Wales.
I remember. Couldn't hit the pitch.
He missed the MCG wicket by that far that they thought he landed one in the goal square. I reckon he might have been pretty close. Peter?
Did you think you were a chance?
Well, I was going really well, Rohan, and Greg Hobbs wrote an article in the paper. I was getting wickets and runs, and there was a side that used to go to New Zealand. Bobby Cowper actually captained the team in New Zealand, and the headline was "Bedford can pack bags for New Zealand." Well, I know hindsight's a wonderful thing, and we were playing a Shield match at the MCG, and the practice wickets were on the oval at the time, and it was a wet day, and I chased the ball out into the outfield, and I slipped and slightly hurt my left hamstring. And we had another Shield match starting on the Friday, and they were picking the team for New Zealand in about 3 weeks' time, and probably foolishly I declared myself fit, and I had an average game. I think I got two scores under 10, and so I didn't make it. But before I went to South, I had an opportunity to go to Adelaide and ostensibly to play with Port Adelaide, but they wanted me to go over and play cricket. And at the time, Phil Ridings was chairman of Selectors of Australia, and Sir Donald Bradman was in Adelaide, of course, at the time. And I think if I'd have perhaps taken that opportunity, things might have worked out a lot better, because at the time, through that off-season, 67, 68, Terry Jenner moved from Western Australia to South Australia, and I think I was a better player than Terry Jenner.
Now, Finey, you've dudded Peter here because you told him one of the conditions of him agreeing to do this was that he'd get to play some of his favourite music, and I've heard nothing.
Well, that's how we're going to finish the drive with all of our stars in cars. Have you brought a CD along?
I have, Finey,
and
I just wondered if you wouldn't mind whacking this into the recording.
Now, we're going to Rohan considers himself a musical connoisseur.
Yeah.
I beg to differ, but we're just going to cue it up and...
Don't know if I go back as far as Peter's musical taste. What have we
Let's
got?
have a listen.
Oh, yes.
Oh, well, we can do this drive 2 more times before this ends.
Straight out of 1972, Don McLean and
Don
American
McLean,
Pie.
American Pie, right? Yeah.
People dance and maybe... Everybody knows the words.
They do.
Come on, Peter.
February made me shiver with every paper I delivered. Bad news on the doorstep. I couldn't take one more step. I can't remember if I cried when I read about his widow's bride, but something touched me deep inside the day the music died. So bye bye, Miss American Pie. Drove my Chevy to the levee, but the levee was dry. And good old boys were drinking whiskey and rye, singing, this'll be the day that I die. This'll be the day that I die.
Now it cranks up.
I tell you what, Rohan, does it get any better than sitting in a car, going for a drive with the 1970 Brownlow Medalist, Victorian champion cricketer, and singing Don McLean's American Pie now?
Not a lot.
Now-
Good Port Melbourne boy, I'm just glad he didn't knock us out.
Now that was fun. Thanks so much for being our first
terrific
Pete.
to,
Cheers, Peter.
cheers, Rohan. Cheers, Finey. Really enjoyed the
Driving
journey,
wasn't too
mate.
bad, was it?
It was great.